Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 43 of the Road to 2K on chess.com Rapid. Now, you're probably going to notice we already have an evaluation board on the screen, and that's because in my journey to chess improvement, which is really what the series is about, I do a lot of extra chess. So I run a chess club here in Phoenix, as we see on my other overlay with the Phoenix Chess Club, which I'll put up later in the video. But we also, I play in a league called the Lee Chess Leagues over on leechess.org, where you get teamed up on a team of 8 players. And every single week you play an opponent. It's an international league. And this week I actually had a pretty interesting game as the board 6 on the team. So I wanted to show that to you guys today. Now, the time control is 45 minutes plus 45-second increment. And you're going to notice I'm going to point out a few times as we go along what my time control utilization is. And mind you that these ratings, this 1875 and this 1928, are actually the Lee Chess Classical ratings. So, jumping into the game, I did a little bit of prep ahead of time because you do know who your opponent is and you schedule with them. So I knew that they like to play into a Caro-Kann. I didn't see any fantasy variation in their database, so I thought I'd go for that and really kind of see what happens. I was also looking at the Alien Gambit, so as we get in here, instead playing like knight to c3, if takes, knight out, knight here, h3, and knight captures f7, the Alien Gambit. Now, I'd also never played this before, but especially in these leagues where you have time to prep for your opponent, sometimes it's nice to catch them off guard with what you're playing. But alas, I got nervous when I sat down to play. So we got into our opening, and I played the fantasy variation after about a minute of thought. The fantasy variation is kind of interesting. I think we've gotten it once or twice on the channel, where essentially you want them to take this pawn, and then you go for a big pawn center, you develop around it, and you try and create an attack. So our opponent obliged, played d captures e4. Typically better is going to be a move like e6 or a move like g6. These two are probably the two most challenging variations, I think, to play against, and neither one I particularly love to see. So it was a little bit of a sigh of relief to see my opponent take the pawn like happened in the game. Now, after I took back, our opponent played e5, which is the critical move, knight to f3, knight to f6. Now, there is a little bit of a gambit line here where they can go e captures d4, and you immediately play bishop to c4. It's called the Maroczy Gambit, where the idea is you're just trying to pile as much pressure on this f7 pawn as you can. But after knight f6, I took a really long time here, and I couldn't decide what I thought the best move was. So it took me about, what does that make? 13 minutes of thought to come up with bishop g5. Now, the best move in the position, I believe, is bishop to c4, continuing to go for this idea, where you're actually fine to sacrifice this pawn. And I believe the move here is you actually castle first before you go for bishop captures f7, because there's no way to truly defend this pawn yet. This knight isn't doing a whole lot in the position. So, a lot of tactics lurking in the position for us as white. But after all that time, bishop g5, and that's the tough part about classical, is sometimes you're just going to lose so much of this time trying to find the critical move, and sometimes you still miss. So, queen to b6. Looking at this immediately, we have a target on the d4 pawn. We also have a target on the b2 pawn. So I opted to go for bishop captures f6 first to try and force our opponent to respond on this side of the board, in actively giving up the rook, saying, hey, you can take it, but I think that we have enough activity on our side. So queen captures b2, and here I took another 9 minutes deciding what I wanted to do. I was looking at moves like, knight b to d2, defending the rook. This is a hanging pawn right now, but not really. I did think our opponent was going to take here, and then we maybe have pawn takes, but that's not the best line in the position. Now, instead, I ended up, after all that time, I played bishop captures e5, thinking, well, I'm preserving my bishop. We're going to play a position in which I have won a piece, or I've won a pawn and an exchange for the rook, and the queen is kind of offsides. Now, our opponent opted to play f6 instead of queen captures a1, which also really just threw me off, and I had no idea what I was doing here at this point. So bishop captures e5, f6, and it took me a lot of time here as well to kind of decide what I wanted to do. And eventually I ended up playing knight b to d2, saying if you're not going to take the rook, I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to redefend it, and I'm going to give back the piece that we won just a move ago. So f captures e5, and not seeing anything else, I play rook to b1 first to tempo the queen, get it out of our position, giving up this a2 pawn, but saying that the queen is off center. And already you can see one of the big ideas of the fantasy variation, where all of our pieces are really active, and black has taken a lot of time to just bring their queen into position, try and ravage our position with one piece, which typically won't end as well. Now, our opponent did take. So here we play bishop c4, attacking the queen, defended by our knight, putting pressure over on the f7 square, and really trying to play into the ideas of the fantasy variation of saying you take a slightly suboptimal position to make sure that your pieces are alive and they're attacking fast. So our opponent plays queen to a5. At this point, I snap off the pawn in the center. Material is back to equal or back to equality. But even here, we can see why development is so important, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces already developed. Our opponent only has their queen out. All these other pieces are sitting on the back rank. So there's really nothing else that, as long as white can get the attack going, this should be a win. So the move I was looking at here is if our opponent takes a little bit too much time. So let's say they play, I don't know, maybe like bishop to b4 attacking the pawn. I was looking at moves like queen to h5 check, and I was thinking that after a move like g6, something like knight captures g6. Now, I did miss that the queen is hanging at the end of that line, so I'm hoping I wouldn't have played into that. But there's also probably moves, I'm assuming maybe even just like castles here to get out of the position. And it says it's brilliant because you're going to give up this piece for the attack. I have to imagine that bishop f7 check is probably the way to go, and I guess it actually does want queen h5 check. And after g6, bishop f7 check now? Not quite. Queen h4. So lots of ideas to go through. I have to learn a lot from this game, but alas, that did happen. In the game, we had g6 defending against queen to h5 check. We played queen to f3, threatening here. Our opponent played bishop to e7, and bishop e7 is a really creative defense. Initially I was like, well, you're going to lose the right to castle, but our opponent's big idea was actually sliding the rook over to f8 and creating some counterplay, creating some tempo, and allowing them to get active and get their pieces moving. So I played bishop f7 check to force the king over to d8, thinking, well, now the king is stuck in the center, all my pieces are developed. I played bishop captures g6 first, because if we have a move like h captures g6, the idea is that you play knight to f7 check, the king maybe goes to d7, and then you snap off the rook in the corner. But our opponent was smart enough. I should point out too with time here, is after that bishop capture, it took me 3 minutes to play here. And then I realized how down I was on time, and I really started to speed up. But I did take another 6 minutes before playing this bishop check. So bishop captures g6, bishop where were we? Yeah, bishop to e6, and it's a very sharp position where I felt that I was better. But to be able to prove that I was better was going to take a little bit of conversion. So in this position, after another good bit of thought, I played rook captures b7 with the idea that I was going to sacrifice this rook on this knight to try and win the queen. So if we play something like this, or let's say our opponent, a little bit of a spoiler alert there, let's say if our opponent takes h captures g6, the idea is something like rook captures b8 check. And if rook captures, you have knight to c6, which is a fork. You'll win this. And really importantly, the knight covers the b1 square. So at the end of this line, there is no infiltration of the rook on b1 to win your other rook. However, our opponent was smarter than that. They played rook to f8, tempoing our queen, and here the engine doesn't give me the blessing. It very simply doesn't. I was so stuck in the tank here. I was typing in the little chat, like you can whisper to spectators on Lee Chess about what I was going to do here. And after quite a bit of thought, after nearly another 6 minutes on my clock, I sacked my queen on f8 for the rook, thinking that I was going to pick up the queen, or if not, I was going to pick up a pretty substantial amount of material. So our opponent obliges. They play bishop captures f8, rook captures b8 with the same idea where if rook captures, we immediately have knight captures c6, and this position is just dead winning. Our opponent, however, played king to c7, which I saw. I don't understand why I didn't think about it more, but I simply didn't. This move is beautiful because you give up the rook, but it keeps the queens on the board. And after all these trades, so if we play this variation out, which is actually going to end up happening in the game, so I'll hold for just a minute, black does end up material. But, so having to bail out, I play rook captures a8, and if we look at the evaluation here on the left side of the screen, you'll see it's still fairly equal, even though we don't have a queen, because we have all these other pieces. They're fairly active. This bishop is still hanging. Our opponent plays queen to a1, and I make a blunder with king to f2. Now, king to f2 is only a blunder if my opponent finds the move queen captures d4 check, which I completely missed in the position. And I have to imagine that we have to try and run away, maybe king to g3 or king up. Is it king to f1? Apparently there's some move here. King to e2 is the only thing to hold. And it looks like queen captures e5 is the way to go. And then I would have to sit here and calculate. I'm looking at rook captures f8. I'm looking at rook captures a7 check, king over. This fork doesn't work because the bishop is there, so maybe you do just cash out and grab the bishop. But alas, our opponent, after quite a bit of thought, misses it and plays queen captures h1. Now here is probably the single move I'm most proud of in the position. Is I play knight to f1, which chess.com does give a brilliancy to. The idea behind knight to f1 is this queen, although it's not going to get one, it's trapped. It can't move anywhere. It's completely stuck. And the variation that I saw happening was not what happened in the game. Is I was thinking our opponent was going to play something like bishop to h6. We maybe play this check here. The king comes up. We capture this pawn here, and then our opponent actually plays bishop e3 check, after which the king should stay near. You probably have to play, I guess you can't play king e2. You do have to take the bishop, and then the queen escapes, but it's a queen and a bishop versus these three pieces with all the pawns, and the engine gives this a winning position. Trying to win against a queen when you don't have a queen is quite tough, especially for someone my level, so I don't know if I would have been able to convert it. But our opponent does make the final blunder in this game, is they play bishop to g7. So we skewer the king to the bishop to snap this off, which was our opponent's last chance. We take here, and I go ahead and I pin the bishop to the king. The king came up, and I saw here, and I think it's not probably the cleanest way to convert, but it's the one I'm the most proud of converting this way, is I opt to just sacrifice the rook for the bishop to kill any counterplay. Because if we look at the rest of the position, once again, the queen is completely stuck. The knight covers this pawn, the king covers this pawn, and the king, the black king I should say, is never going to be able to get in because the pawns are creating kind of this blockade. So I sack for the last piece, I take off the knight, and now the way I was viewing this position is we are playing 3 pawns and a knight versus a king. Is I just need to be able to promote this position without using my king, because otherwise, once again, all this down here will fall. Now, you could make an argument where technically I could sit here and reroute my knight all the way back to try and defend my knight, but I think that's kind of silly because now I'd be able to go and I guess I couldn't still leave because this G pawn does need to be protected. So maybe some failed logic in thinking the knight actually probably has to come to this square. So we could do something like this, and now my king can run away and go help the pawns to promote. But none of that happened. In the position, we played d5 first, defending our knight. The opponent came up. We play c4, which is a move that I really like in these positions because if our opponent does oblige and take here, what we're going to do is we're just going to run with d6, and our opponent can have our knight, we'll queen, we can promote this second one to a rook, and then we're just, game is over. Our opponent, rather, they try and defend. We play e5 check, advancing all of our pawns. And here we can continue to hang this pawn. We just play e6. Our opponent comes up. And I did play e7, ultimately. Our opponent could have continued the game by playing king to d7, a move like pawn up. Our opponent probably has to stay back just to defend. And after c5, knight in, knight check, king back. We can end this one in style with a move. We need to not stalemate, which is the really important part. Oh gosh, how do we not stalemate here? Why am I blanking? Maybe d7 check. King captures pawn. c6. King up. Knight f7 check. King c7 and promote. And then queen and knight versus a king should always be a win. But yeah, so once we hit knight f7, or once we hit in this position, we play d6. Our opponent actually went ahead and they resigned the position, knowing that we're going to promote, knowing that we can find the technique to get this through. So I really just wanted to show this game to see that, you know, we are working on classical work. We're working on anything that would help us to really reach that 2K level, even if it's not always 10-minute chess.com rapid. So to end today's episode, if we do look at the game review, we played at a 78.1 and our opponent played with a 70.7. We had 3 brilliants in this game, a couple blunders, a couple misses, and ultimately chess.com's little engine tracker says that we played at a 1900, our opponent played at a 1500 rating, and we managed to secure a victory for our team in the Elite Chess Leagues. So I will leave the description down below. If you have any interest, the season is currently ongoing, but the league is always looking for alternates. And then when the next season starts, if you enjoyed the league, you can definitely join on as a full team member and get some serious classical games under your belt. That's, I don't know, it's a really fun community, and I highly recommend people join. So thank you for joining me on this little bit of an atypical day. I will go ahead, if you have comments on how I played or anything like that, leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed the video, like it, and go ahead and check below, see if you subscribed so you don't miss any of my future content. But I'll see you guys on the next day.